The crack of the whip split the air before Samuel Calloway saw her. Dust hung low along the San Pedro Trail, clinging to the heat and the smell of sweat and fear. Two men dragged a young Apache woman through it, her wrists bound, her back striped raw. She did not cry. She did not beg. When one of them leaned too close, she lunged and sank her teeth into his arm with a feral, desperate force. The man howled, flung her hard to the ground, and reached for a stick lying in the dirt. That was when Samuel stopped. He had walked past worse things since the war ended. Burned cabins, broken men, silences that screamed louder than gunfire. He had learned how to keep moving, how to look away and survive. But as the stick rose above her and she lifted her face, bloody, defiant, unbroken, Samuel stepped between them. For the first time in years, he chose not to walk on. Before we continue, please take a moment to support the channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or hitting that subscribe button helps these Wild West tales reach more people who love them. Let me know where you're listening from, and thank you for riding along with us. Red Mesa Crossing lay a half-day's ride south of the San Pedro Trail, a scatter of low buildings crouched against the land as if bracing for judgment. By 1816, the war was over, but it had not truly ended here. The law had a name and a badge, but little reach. Men came west carrying rifles, scars, and reasons they did not speak aloud. Those who stayed learned quickly what could be seen and what was safer left unseen. Beyond the town, the land opened into brittle valleys and redstone shelves where the wind never rested. Water ran thin and seasonal. Ranches stood far apart, each one a small kingdom of fence posts, dust, and stubborn survival. Calloway Homestead sat alone near a shallow draw, its corral leaning but sound, its forge blackened by years of steady use. Samuel Calloway had built most of it himself, board by board, after the Army had no more use for him. He was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s, with hands shaped by iron and rust. The right side of his neck bore an old scar, pale, twisted, hidden most days beneath his collar. He spoke little in town, bought what he needed, and left before dusk. People knew him as steady, capable, and distant. They did not know where he had served, only that he had come back quieter than most. The girl on the trail did not look at the world the way Samuel did, even bound. She stood straight when the men dragged her forward, her balance low and deliberate, as if she were measuring the ground with every step. Her hair hung loose and tangled, dark against skin dusted red by the land itself. Blood had dried at the corner of her mouth, but her eyes were clear, watchful, bright with a refusal that had not yet learned the word surrender. She wore no ornament, no sign of rank or family, only the marks of a journey that had stripped her down to breath and bone. When she met Samuel's gaze, there was no plea in it, only calculation, as if she were already deciding what kind of danger he might be. Samuel felt that look settle on him like a weight. He had seen fear before, raw and shaking, begging for mercy. He had seen hatred too, sharp and reckless. What he had not seen in years was this, a stillness that came from having nothing left to bargain with. It unsettled him more than the whip ever could. Behind him, the land breathed its dry heat, indifferent and endless. Ahead lay the road back to the life he had chosen, quiet, contained, untouched. Between them stood a woman who did not belong to anyone, and a choice Samuel Calloway had spent years teaching himself not to make. The war had taught him how quickly a man could become something he no longer recognized. The frontier, he was learning, would test whether he could remain that man or finally refuse him. The men argued loudly when Samuel stepped between them, their voices sharp with insult and disbelief. One spat into the dust and demanded more money. The other kept his wounded arm tucked close, eyes narrowed with a kind of hate that waited for permission. Samuel did not raise his voice. He reached into his coat, counted out the coins he had, and laid them in the man's open palm. It was not much. It was enough. The exchange ended the way such things always did, too quickly, too quietly. The men turned their horses and left, throwing curses over their shoulders, as if words might stitch their pride back together. Dust swallowed them. The trail went still again, broken only by the rasp of breath and the soft scrape of rope against skin. Samuel crouched and cut the knots at the girl's wrists. She did not thank him. She did not move right away. When the rope fell free, she flexed her hands slowly, testing pain, testing blood. Then she looked up at him, her mouth twisting into something that was not quite a smile. "You should have me tied," she said. Her English was careful, worn thin by use. The other one only lost his arm because he did. Samuel paused, knife still in his hand. He did not answer her. There was nothing in her words that asked for a defense, and nothing in him that wanted to offer one. "You're free," but he said at last. "You can go." He stood and turned away, already stepping back toward his horse. It was the cleanest ending he knew how to make. The sound of footsteps followed him, not hurried, not cautious, simply there. Samuel stopped and looked back. The woman stood several paces behind him, her posture steady despite the blood on her back and the raw marks on her wrists. She had not come closer, but she had not gone the other way either. "I need rest," she said, "and I don't have a place to go." Her honesty was blunt, almost careless. No promises, no gratitude, just fact. Samuel studied her, weighing the distance between what he had done and what he was about to do. "You don't have to come with me," he said. "I won't stop you if you leave." She held his gaze without blinking. "I know." A moment stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind moving through scrub grass. Samuel felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came when responsibility threatened to root itself where he had worked hard to keep the ground bare. "Do you trust me?" he asked. The question surprised them both. It slipped out before he could reconsider it, before he could soften it into something safer. Her answer came without hesitation. "No." Samuel let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Then why follow me?" She considered him again, this time more carefully, as if adjusting the measure she had already taken. "Because I'm not afraid of you." The words landed harder than any accusation. Samuel turned away quickly, hiding the expression that crossed his face. Fear, he understood. It was familiar, predictable. This was something else, something closer to truth. They rode in silence. Samuel led, setting a pace that did not strain her, though he did not say so. He felt her presence behind him like a question he was refusing to answer. The land shifted slowly as the afternoon wore on, the sun lowering just enough to take the edge off the heat. By the time Callaway Homestead came into view, the shadows were long and thin. He dismounted and tied his horse without looking back. When he finally turned, she stood near the corral, scanning the place with an alert stillness. Not relief, not hope, only assessment. "You can stay the night," he said. "There's water, food. After that, we'll see." She nodded. Samuel nodded once. It was more agreement than he had intended. Inside the small cabin, he set a blanket near the hearth and left it there without comment. She took it when he stepped away. He busied himself with unnecessary tasks, mending a hinge, checking the firewood, anything to keep his hands moving. Only later, when the light had faded and the land outside had gone quiet, did he realize something had shifted. He had not saved her. He knew that. He had only stopped walking, and for the first time since the war, that choice followed him home. The first days passed without names. Samuel did not ask for hers, and she did not offer it. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive, in a place where survival had long learned to speak for itself. He showed her the pump, the corral gate that stuck when the weather turned dry, the place along the draw where water sometimes pooled after rain. He did not tell her what to do. He did not tell her where to sleep. He simply went about his work and let her decide where she fit within it. She watched everything, the way he checked the fence before dawn, fingers brushing the posts as if counting them, the way he ate slow, measured, never rushing, as though he had learned what hunger did to a man who trusted it too much. She noticed how he flinched at sudden noise, how his eyes tracked movement before his head ever turned. He carried himself like someone who had learned, at great cost, that the world could break without warning. Samuel noticed her noticing. It made him uneasy in a way he could not name. He was used to being unseen, to passing through towns and lives without leaving much behind. Under her gaze, he felt exposed, not judged exactly, but weighed, measured the same way she measured the land, the sky, the distance between threats. On the third morning, he woke to the sound of movement outside the cabin. She was already at the trough, rinsing blood from her shirt with careful hands. The wounds on her back were worse than he had thought, filming in thin, angry lines that had begun to swell. She worked methodically, jaw set, breath steady. When she noticed him watching, she did not stop. "I can help," he said. She shook her head once. "I know." It was not refusal, just fact. Samuel stood there longer than necessary, then turned back inside. The instinct to insist rose and fell within him like a tide he no longer trusted. He reminded himself again that control was not care, that help offered too forcefully became something else. Later that day, she took a shovel from the shed and began clearing stones near the north fence where the ground had buckled. Samuel watched from a distance, irritation and concern tangling together. It was heavy work. Her hands were still raw. He waited for her to ask. She never did. When he finally crossed the yard and took the other end of the shovel, she paused, studying him. "I didn't tell you to," she said. "I know." She considered that, then stepped aside without another word. They worked in silence, the rhythm slow and deliberate. Dirt fell away from the blade, stones piled up, the fence straightened by degrees. It was the closest thing to peace Samuel had felt in years. At dusk, he set a bowl of food on the table and stepped back. She ate without hurry, without apology. When she finished, she wiped her hands and finally spoke again. "My name is Ayana." Samuel nodded as if he had known it all along. "Samuel." She repeated it once, testing the sound. "Samuel." The days settled into a pattern that did not announce itself, but grew roots all the same. She rose early, often before him, and learned the land with a quiet thoroughness that impressed him. She found a place along the draw where wild herbs grew stubbornly through rock and began gathering them at dawn. She treated the cut on his forearm one evening without asking, pressing a poultice into the skin with firm fingers. "You've done this before," he said. "For myself," she replied. He did not ask more. At night they sat near the fire, the space between them deliberate but not cold. Sometimes she sharpened a blade she had fashioned from scrap metal. Sometimes he repaired tack or hammered out a horseshoe by lamplight. Sparks jumped and died. The sound of iron on iron filled the space where conversation might have gone. Samuel found himself listening to her breathing, steady and unafraid. He wondered how long it had been since he had shared a room with another person and not felt the urge to flee. More than once he woke in the night, heart pounding, the echo of old screams still clinging to his thoughts. Each time he stayed where he was. Each time he reminded himself that she was not trapped here, that she had chosen to stay. The distinction mattered more than he could explain. He watched her too, for signs of fear. She startled at sudden flame, at the sharp crack of wood in the fire. Once, when a log collapsed inward, she flinched hard enough to drop her knife. Samuel froze, hands raised as if afraid to touch the moment. She picked the knife up herself, met his eyes. "It passes," she said. He believed her. One afternoon, while repairing a gate hinge, Samuel caught himself giving instructions without thinking. The words left his mouth sharp, automatic. He stopped mid-sentence, breath hitching. Ayana looked at him calmly, waited. He swallowed. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, echoing him. "But you can finish." Something loosened in his chest. That night, as the stars spread cold and bright above the homestead, Samuel found himself speaking of the war for the first time without being asked. Not the battles, not the names, just the weight of orders given and followed, and the way silence had wrapped itself around everything afterward. "I thought if I kept my hands busy," he said, staring into the fire, "I wouldn't have to remember what they did." Liana listened without interruption. When he finished, she did not offer comfort in the way he had learned to expect it. No soft reassurances, no attempt to absolve him. "Did it work?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." She nodded as if that were the only possible answer. "Then maybe this is different." He did not ask her what she meant. He was afraid of the answer. The change between them was not sudden. It did not announce itself with a confession or a touch. It showed itself in smaller things, in the way Samuel began leaving the cabin door unlatched at night, in the way Ayana no longer kept her knife within arm's reach when she slept, in the way she sometimes rode ahead of him on the trail, trusting that he would follow. Trust, Samuel was learning, was not a thing given all at once. It was built in the spaces where control was resisted and choice was honored. One evening, as the season edged toward autumn, Samuel returned from checking the outer fence to find Ayana sitting on the step, staring out toward the hills. Her posture was still, but something in it felt unsettled. "They'll come again," she said without turning. He did not ask who. "Maybe." She looked at him then. "If they do, you won't walk away." It was not a question. Samuel felt the truth of it settle in his bones. "No," he said quietly, "I won't." The fire inside the cabin burned low that night, throwing long shadows against the walls. Samuel lay awake longer than usual, listening to the land breathe. For the first time since he had chosen this life, he did not imagine himself alone in it. He did not call what he felt hope. He did not dare give it that name. But when morning came and Ayana stood in the pale light of dawn, steady and unbroken, Samuel Calloway understood something he had spent years avoiding. Some ground, once opened, refused to close again, and he was no longer certain he wanted it to. Edgar Holt arrived at Calloway Homestead just past midday, riding a mount that looked as mean as its owner. Samuel heard him before he saw him, the jangle of loose tack, the careless confidence of a man who assumed every gate would open if pushed hard enough. By the time Samuel stepped out from the forge, Edgar was already dismounting, eyes roaming the place with practiced appraisal. "Heard you my trade," Edgar said, spitting into the dust. His gaze slid past Samuel, caught, and lingered. Ayana was near the corral, lifting a feed sack onto her shoulder. She moved with the controlled efficiency Samuel had come to recognize, neither rushing nor hesitating. She did not look at the rider. She did not need to. Samuel felt the shift in the air the moment Edgar saw her. "Well now," Edgar drawled, "didn't know you were running that kind of outfit." Ayana stiffened. The sack slipped from her shoulder and hit the ground with a dull thud. "She's not for trade," Samuel said. Edgar's grin widened, slow and ugly. "Didn't say she was. Just didn't think you were the sentimental sort." His eyes raked over her openly now. "Strong, though. Bet she works hard. Bet she—" Ayana moved before Samuel could speak again. She stepped back, putting the corral rail between them, her hand dropping instinctively to the knife at her belt. Her voice was low, sharp. "Don't!" Edgar laughed. He reached out anyway, fingers grazing the sleeve of her shirt. The sound Samuel made was not a shout. It was something older. He crossed the yard in 3 strides and drove his fist into Edgar's jaw. The man went down hard, the breath knocked clean out of him. Samuel followed, dragging him up by the collar and slamming him back against the fence. "I said she's not for trade," Samuel growled. "You don't look at her. You don't speak to her. You leave." Edgar's eyes burned with fury and disbelief. "You think you can touch me and walk away?" Samuel released him and stepped back, chest heaving. His hands were shaking. He forced them open, then clenched them again at his sides. "I don't care what you think," he said. Edgar spat blood into the dirt, laughing through it. "You will." He mounted his horse without another word and rode off, shoulders rigid with humiliation. Only when the sound of hooves faded did Samuel realize how hard his heart was pounding. The familiar rush of violence, the one he had spent years burying, still hummed in his veins. He turned toward Ayana, bracing himself for what he might see there. She stood exactly where she had been, eyes fixed on him. "You didn't have to," she said. "Yes," he replied, voice rough. "I did." They did not speak of it again that day. Work resumed, but the rhythm was broken, every motion carrying an edge that had not been there before. As evening fell, Samuel found himself scanning the horizon more often, listening harder for sounds that did not belong. That night, after the fire had burned low, Ayana finally spoke. "He'll come back," she said. Samuel nodded. "I know." There was no fear in her voice, only certainty. He lay awake long after she slept, staring at the dark rafters above him. The memory of Edgar's face, twisted with rage, replayed again and again. Samuel knew that look. He had worn it himself once, in another place, under other orders. The difference now was the choice. If Edgar came back, Samuel would not walk away. He had already crossed that line. The knowledge settled heavily in his chest, not as regret, but as resolve. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant scent of dust and change. The quiet they had built was breaking, and this time Samuel Calloway knew exactly why he would stand his ground. They went into Red Mesa Crossing 2 days later. Samuel told himself it was necessity. Flour was running low, a hinge needed replacing. The mule's shoe had split, but he knew better. You did not avoid a storm by pretending the sky was clear. Edgar Holt had ridden away with a bruise and a promise in his eyes, and Samuel had learned long ago that men like that did not forget humiliation. They waited. They looked for ground where witnesses could be bent into silence. Ayanna rode beside him, not behind. She had chosen that position without comment, and Samuel had not argued. The town came into view slowly, roofs crouched low against the sun, dust lifting at the first hint of traffic. Faces turned as they passed, some curious, some wary, more than a few openly hostile. Ayanna felt it like heat against her skin, the old familiar awareness of being measured and misnamed without a word spoken. Samuel felt it too. He kept his hands loose, his pace steady. The war had taught him how quickly a crowd could become a weapon. They had just dismounted near the supply store when Edgar's voice cut through the street. "Well, I'll be damned." He leaned against the saloon rail, hat tipped back, the bruise on his jaw half faded but not forgotten. Two men flanked him, Miles Rooker and Jonah Pike, faces dull with anticipation. Edgar's eyes slid to Ayanna and stayed there. "Didn't think you'd bring your property into town," he said loudly. "Must be feeling generous." The street slowed, boots stopped, conversations thinned into listening. Ayanna did not move. Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between Edgar and the space she occupied. He did not raise his voice. "You should walk away." Edgar grinned. "Just asking a question. What's she worth these days?" "I might." Samuel turned his head just enough to look at Ayanna. "Do you want to leave?" The question was quiet, meant only for her. She met his eyes. There was no fear there, no plea. "No." Something settled inside Samuel at that single word. He faced Edgar again. "She's here because she chooses to be and because I allow it." The silence that followed was sharp. Edgar laughed, the sound cracking with anger. "Here, that man thinks he owns choice now." Samuel closed the distance in one measured step and drove his fist into Edgar's mouth. The impact echoed off the storefronts. Edgar hit the ground hard, shock stealing his breath. Samuel did not follow with another blow. He stood over him, chest rising and falling, hands open at his sides. "Get up," he said. Edgar scrambled back, spitting blood, eyes wild. "This isn't over." "No," Samuel agreed. "It is." Sheriff Thomas Whitaker arrived moments later, his expression already weary. He took in the scene with a long look, then fixed his gaze on Edgar. "You start this?" Edgar snarled something incoherent. Whitaker turned to Samuel. "You finish it?" Samuel nodded once. "Yes." Whitaker exhaled. "Then all of you clear the street." They left town under watchful eyes, Edgar's hatred burning bright enough to follow them all the way back to the San Pedro Trail. That night, the land did not sleep. Ayanna sensed it first. The wrongness in the wind, the way the horses shifted restlessly long before sound carried. She woke Samuel with a touch to his arm, finger steady. "They're close," she said. Samuel did not ask how she knew. He moved quietly, gathering what he had already prepared. He had not wanted this kind of readiness again, but wanting had never kept anyone alive. They took position near the Arroyo Coyote, where the ground fell away into stone and shadow. Moonlight fractured across the rocks, turning depth into illusion. It was a place that punished haste. Edgar came with Miles and Jonah, all three moving too fast, confidence blinding them. Edgar carried rope. Miles had a pistol. Jonah kept glancing back, already unsure. Samuel waited. When Edgar stepped wrong, the ground gave him exactly what it promised. His boots slid on loose stone. He went down hard, striking the ravine wall with a sickening crack. The rope spilled from his hands. He screamed once, high and sharp. Miles froze. Jonah ran. Samuel disarmed Miles without firing a shot, pinning him until the man sobbed his surrender. Edgar lay twisted at the base of the arroyo, his leg bent at an angle that made his bravado meaningless. Ayanna stood above him, bow lowered but ready. "Finish it," Edgar rasped, panic leaking through the pain. "You think you're better?" Samuel looked at him for a long moment. The choice lay there, simple and terrible. End it, silence the past, become what the war had shaped him to be. He shook his head. No, Edgar laughed weakly. You're a fool. Maybe, Samuel said, but you're done. They bound Edgar and left him alive for the law he had mocked. Sheriff Whitaker took him at dawn, his expression grim. No speeches, no mercy offered, just consequence. When the dust finally settled, Samuel and Ayanna sat on the cabin steps, the sky pale with morning. You could have killed him, Ayanna said. I know. Why didn't you? Samuel stared out at the land, the fences, the quiet that had been broken and stitched again. Because if I had, I would have taught myself the wrong lesson. She studied him, then nodded once. The sun climbed higher, warming the scars they both carried, and for the first time, the silence between them did not feel like waiting for something to return. It felt like something new holding its ground. The weeks that followed did not bring celebration. They brought quiet. Edgar Holt's name moved through Red Mesa Crossing like a rumor people no longer wished to repeat. Some said his leg would never mend right. Others said he had been sent east under guard. No one argued that his trade was finished. Men like him depended on silence and fear, and both had slipped from his grasp. Sheriff Whitaker did not come to Callaway Homestead again. He did not need to. Life returned to its smaller sounds, hammer on iron, wind in the draw, the creak of leather at dawn. Yet something between Samuel and Ayanna had shifted, subtle but irreversible. The danger had passed, but the choice remained, standing between them like a door neither pretended not to see. One evening, as autumn pressed its first cool breath into the valley, Ayanna did not rise when the work was done. She stayed seated on the corral rail, watching the sun bleed into the redstone hills. Samuel wiped his hands on a cloth and waited. You didn't kill him, she said at last. Not because you couldn't, because you wouldn't. He nodded. That's the difference I'm trying to live with. She turned to him then, her expression unreadable. Do you think I stayed because I had nowhere else to go? The question landed heavy. Samuel answered honestly. At first, yes. And now he hesitated, the old fear rising, the one that told him happiness was borrowed time, that anything good would eventually demand payment. Now I think you stayed because you chose to. She studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for the lie he had learned not to hide. When she did not find it, her shoulders eased. I was afraid, she said quietly. Afraid you saw me as something wounded you could keep safe, like an animal you'd learn to care for. The words cut deeper than any accusation. Samuel swallowed. I was afraid you'd think that too. Silence stretched, not strained, but full. I don't need saving, Ayanna said, but I don't want to keep running. Samuel took a step closer, careful not to crowd her. I don't know how to promise happiness, he said. I only know how to choose the same thing each morning, and some days, that choice is harder than others. She looked out over the land again. That's enough. The wedding took place at St. Helena's Chapel the following spring. There was no procession, no finery worth naming, just clean shirts, steady hands, and a small gathering of people who had learned slowly that the world could be wider than they once believed. Sheriff Whitaker stood witness. Abraham Cole nodded from the back pew, his approval quiet but unmistakable. When Samuel spoke his vows, his voice did not shake. He did not ask forgiveness for what he had been. He did not promise to become something else. He promised only to remain present, to listen, and to choose. Ayanna's vows were shorter. She spoke of ground reclaimed, of breath taken freely, of staying. They left the chapel together, not to applause, but to sunlight. Years later, the land around Callaway Homestead no longer felt like a refuge built against the world. It felt like part of it. Fences were mended, trees planted. A child's laughter carried across the draw, light and unafraid. Samuel sometimes watched Ayanna with their son balanced on her hip, her shadow long against the earth, and felt the old weight stir, not as shame but as memory. Scars did not fade. They did not need to. They were proof. At dusk, when the forge fire burned low and the valley filled with the sound of evening, Samuel would sit on the step and listen to the land breathe. He no longer waited for the past to catch up with him. Some ground, once broken, learned how to hold life again, and this time he chose to stay and tend it. The tale of Samuel Calloway and Ayano Sao at Calloway Homestead delivers a powerful life lesson. True courage lies in choosing to honor another's freedom and dignity, even when it means confronting your own fears and past. Samuel, hardened by war and loss, had learned to walk away from pain, yet Ayana's unyielding spirit, defiant despite her wounds, forced him to pause and act. His decision to free her, not as a savior but as someone respecting her autonomy, and her choice to stay, built a bond rooted in mutual respect and trust. This story teaches us that love and connection are not about control or possession, but about creating space for others to choose their path while standing beside them against life's storms. Samuel's refusal to kill Edgar, despite the temptation, underscores the importance of breaking cycles of violence and choosing a life defined by integrity over vengeance. Their journey reminds us that healing begins when we stop running from our scars and embrace the vulnerability of building something new together. In our own lives, we're challenged to ask, when do we stop walking away and choose to stand for what matters? If this story stirred your soul, share your reflections in the comments. How have you found courage to choose connection over fear? Your stories fuel this community and keep these lessons alive. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to join us for more heartfelt tales of resilience and redemption. Let's walk this path together, uncovering the truths that shape who we become.